The Iron Game Chalk Talk podcast is brought to you by the following sponsors: EliteForm.com and IgnitionAPG.com. And now, the Iron Game Chalk Talk podcast. Welcome to Iron Game Chalk Talk with your host, Ron McKeefery.
Every time our athletes walk into this weight room, they're going to be pushed to the max.
Let's go! Everything you got!
On this podcast, hear Coach McKeefery's straight talk about training, featuring the top strength and conditioning professionals from around the world. And now, here's your host, Ron McKeefery.
Hey guys, welcome back to Iron Game Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Ron McKeefery, and this is episode number 72. Iron Game Chalk Talk is a weekly podcast where I bring you experts in the field to talk shop. If you haven't already done so, make sure you subscribe to us on iTunes or YouTube, or join the mailing list at ronmckeefery.com to stay up to date with the latest episodes as well as anything else that I have going on. This week, real excited to have Brendan Chaplin on the show today. Brendan is a strength coach over in the UK. He's the head strength coach for Leeds Metropolitan there in the UK, as well as the head strength coach for a MMA team over there. And he's a former MMA fighter. He's been in the field for a while and doing some really, really cool things over there. And got a chance to know him a couple years back and just stayed in touch from UKSCA and just through the years and real impressed with all the stuff that he's got going on. We talk a little bit about his journey, how he got into the field, we get into programming for an MMA or a combat athlete, wrestler, things along those lines. And then a real cool conversation about a 5-step model for adding value in the sporting environment. You know, and so many times as strength coaches, we go into a new environment and we have all the answers or we don't have the answers, and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a situation where we have to really make friends quickly, be able to get administrators, athletes, coaches all to buy in quickly, and oftentimes that leads to mistakes. And so he's got a real cool 5-step model for that. And then we get into his latest book. It's not about sets and reps, and talk a little bit about why he wrote it, what the motivation behind writing it was, and what's it about. So real excited for you to get to know Brendan and to listen to this episode. Before we do, we want to make sure we recognize our sponsors, IgnitionAPG.com and EliteForm.com. EliteForm is a sports science company based in Nebraska, and they have really 3 products. They have the paperless product, which is being able to track workouts to any device, which is where everything's going. We all know that. One of the first places to do that. They have the Power Tracker Lite, which is basically like a Tudo at the rack, and you have the ability to video at the same time, but you're able to see in real time velocity and power. And then they have the Strength Planner Lite, which is basically just a way to build workouts. And we all know that just saving time is such a key aspect to our job, and so being able to do that quickly and manipulate it for a variety of athletes is very important. So there's some top programs that have already gone to this. We first put it in at Tennessee way back when, and can't say that I, how impressed I am with EliteForm and what they've done, but make sure you reach out to them and let them know that you appreciate them being involved with Iron Game Chalk Talk as a sponsor. If you like Iron Game Chalk Talk, you'll definitely like strength-ondemand.com. Strength On Demand is an online archive of strength and conditioning clinic presentations that myself and Rob Taylor put together. And we're actually in the process right now of adding a lot more content to this, but it's 50-plus presentations that you're able to access from anywhere, anytime that you have a Wi-Fi or an internet connection. So if you're a strength and conditioning nerd like myself, and you're constantly looking for ways to get better, whether it be on the plane, on the bus, at night, in the car, whatever it may be, this is a good way to continue to sharpen the sword. So I'd encourage you to check that out. And then for all those young strength coaches that are just getting in the field, that have not either gone through an internship or felt like you went through a great internship, I have strengthcoachbasictraining.com. which is an online community of other strength coaches similar to a situation. So you network right away. It's 8 lectures that we have that you go through, 8 checkpoints with assignments and projects. And then, like I said, we update you on jobs, we update you on all kinds of things. And this is just a really cool resource for young strength coaches. So go to strengthcoachbasictraining.com, sign up for that. Real affordable, and we try to keep you abreast on all the things that are going on. So hope that you check that out. Know you're going to enjoy this episode. Sit back and enjoy Brendan, and we'll see you on the other side. Hey guys, welcome back to Our Game Chalk Talk. I'm excited about our guest today. Good buddy of mine, Brendan Chaplin. He's a strength coach over in the UK, and got a chance to know him a few years back and stayed in touch. And so impressed by the job he's doing over there right now, and just a guy that, as we talk about on the show quite a bit, is committed to making himself the best strength coach that he could possibly be, but also giving back to so many strength coaches as well. And so, man, I appreciate you coming on the show, brother.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ron. Yeah, it's great, mate. It's been a long time coming because I know I've followed your stuff as well, and you've been on my podcast, so it's nice to be able to talk to you again.
He's got the Athletic Development Podcast. If you haven't gone and downloaded that or subscribed to that, make sure you do so because it's a really, really good one. But hey, Brendan, go a little bit, because everybody doesn't, on this side of the pond doesn't, may or may not be familiar with you. Go into your background and kind of how you got to where you're currently at.
Yeah, well, I've been coaching for 8 to 10 years now as an S&C coach, but I first started out as really a martial artist, and my background in martial arts is mixed martial arts, so boxing, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, that kind of thing. And when I first started out, that was my pathway. I really wanted to open up my own gym and build a great stable of athletes there. And I did my degree, and then I started doing an undergrad. And in fact, I watched a video or a DVD. So often these things just kind of trigger things. And I watched one of my MMA coaches gave me a video. I think it might have been one of Vern Gambetta's. And I watched it, and I was just like, wow, this is actually really good stuff, like really solid, and it will really help us. And I think that pretty much fueled me getting into more S&C as opposed to, say, the technical side of mixed martial arts.
Right.
And then I decided to do a master's degree. And then when I finished my master's, I was very, very fortunate, and I got a job as at the English Institute of Sport, and I was working with Great Britain rowing and the under-23s, and that was a fantastic challenge for me because those guys, the volume they train, I mean, they do like 25 hours a week of technical training, and then they do their S&C. So it was a kind of in the deep end type opportunity. And I did that for a couple of years, and I went to work for British Tennis, where I was kind of leading all the delivery for S&C for tennis players. But I found that as much as I enjoyed tennis, and I still enjoy it now, I much have a gravitation towards more like collision-based and contact-based sports.
Right.
And I went and took another job with Huddersfield Giants Rugby League, Super League club, which was awesome. And then I went back to my hometown, which is Leeds. I've been all over the UK, and I took a job with the university there, Leeds Met Carnegie University, where I look after all their teams, but personally deliver to rugby league, rugby union, and the basketball team as well. And I've been there for about 5 or 6 years. But all the way through that whole time, I've always kept my involvement with the MMA fighters and the athletes just from my own passion perspective, really.
Sure.
I love working with those guys. I'm still doing that now, and I have some personal consulting with the RFU, England Rugby Football Union, and England Golf as well. So I'm pretty busy, and I still love my coaching. And it's been a good journey, mate. It's all good.
You're with the Asylum team as well, right?
Say again, sorry.
You're with the Asylum team as well, right? The MMA team there?
That's it. Yeah. So I work with it was funny because the guy who runs that team is a UFC fighter called Danny Mitchell.
Yep.
And I first met him as very often these things happen, just a chance passing. And I was delivering a strength and conditioning seminar to a group of combat athletes, and Danny was in the corner and he was skinny and wiry, but you could see the guy had something there. He had some skill sets, and he sort of asked me if I could help him on his strength stuff, and that was about 7 years ago, mate. And we're still working together now, and he's
awesome.
He's been signed by the UFC. He's had some ups and downs along the way, but it's been a good process.
Very successful fighter, absolutely. What's crazy to me always, and this is, the challenge in strength and conditioning, I think, is, here you are, you're an MMA fighter, and you decide to be a strength coach, and the very first thing you get stuck with is rowing. And it's like the polar opposite of what you think, a combat athlete would get. But it was probably one of the best growing experiences for you, wasn't it?
It really was, because actually the sport is a complete opposite. You're totally right. But from a mindset perspective, those guys are still going to war.
That's right.
And they're still approaching like they're just going to take someone's head off.
That's right.
And the mindset in training, as much as I felt that there was certainly improvements to be made and did make some changes over time, the actual communication with these people, they're from a totally different background, generally speaking.
Yep.
But there's a lot of commonalities there as well in terms of their drive and their ambition for success. So yeah, tough, but a good one for me.
Well, it's such a great lesson for young strength coaches, and I know you're as committed to giving back to young strength coaches as I am. But everybody wants what their passion is, or what they kind of got in what kind of drew them to training and for sport. But then often their first job responsibilities are outside of that passion, and it's important. It's an important step in the process, I think, because you go and you figure out that these athletes are every bit as committed, every bit as they have a lot of the same challenges, and the psychology of an athlete is so important, and I know you believe that as well.
Yeah, I think to put yourself in different environments is one of the best ways to rapidly accelerate your own coach development, in my opinion, because when you work in your own sport, you kind of do what you've always done, or you do what you see other people doing,
right.
And then you kind of take that as being the right way. When you go into a different sport, there is no rules, and you can't just follow. So you have to then create and come up with your own solutions, and you've also got the time frame in there. So those guys, whatever sport it is, they've still got to perform on X day, 3 months down the line. So you've got to create under pressure.
Yep.
And I think for me that is the best way to rapidly improve your competence and your development as a coach, is to force yourself into an environment where you don't have the answers and you have to create under pressure. And it certainly helped me with, and I still like to do it now, to get into the mix with sports that I have no idea really what makes a great athlete in certain sports. It's just good to try and challenge yourself and think outside the box a little bit,
No, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it's what we tell our athletes. We tell our athletes that they grow the most when they're uncomfortable, and it's the same thing we should value as coaches.
Agree.
MMA obviously is getting to be huge around the world, and there's obviously there's a select few people that are getting a chance to work with those fighters, but obviously in a college setting, the closest thing would be wrestling.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about kind of your programming for MMA and how that would maybe translate to wrestling and those coaches that work with wrestling. What's a normal training day look like? What's a normal training week look like? Maybe the annual plan.
Yeah, I think the MMA. I'm not sure on the wrestling front in terms of how you guys work, but over here, MMA fighters and competitors have generally a really high volume program. So from a technical perspective, they'll do 2 sessions a day every day, and when they're competing or when it's sort of 8 to 10 weeks out, that'll be most days they'll jump up to 3 sessions.
Wow.
And we're not talking S&C here either. We're talking technical stuff. Then the technical stuff within that tends to be a lot of quite high intensity drilling and sparring. So the education process for me over the last 5-6 years has really been about that less is more type approach, to say, well, actually, you don't have to be in pain every time you train. You can train smart and you can train productively without actually hurting yourself in the process.
Right.
But as a consequence of that, the S&C program that I tend to work on is very much just about super general basics initially, and teaching people how to lift well, education, and then moving, when they get the confirmation of the competition in, say, 8 to 12 weeks, moving into our more specific preparation phases and working in the conditioning side. But because a lot of the conditioning in the sport is done under fatigue in sparring, which is a good thing, it's like specific conditioning.
Right.
The S&C, the strength program, tends to be focused around that strength and power development. And unless the individual has got some issues that they've had in their technical preparation where they need to complement it with conditioning.
Sure.
But the thing is, there's not a lot of point just replicating exactly what goes on in technical training through your S&C program, i.e. doing high intensity interval training, when the thing that they're missing 80% of the time is their loading and their resistance training. And one of my philosophies with MMA is I want to get my athletes to be maximally powerful with their opponent. So if you're fighting at, say, 77 welterweight and your opponent is 77, you're probably going to be more like 85 when you step into the cage.
Right.
You need to be then maximally powerful with 85k in your hands. And if you're trying to smash your opponent, 85k opponent, you need to be used to dealing with loads at 85k relatively from a power perspective. So what does that mean? Well, if we got max power in there at sort of 40, 50, 60%, that means that the guys have got to be strong, because that means they've got to be able to throw 160 around for fun, so that they can absolutely play with 85k. So, there's a solid argument for building strong, powerful MMA fighters there and having that as a cornerstone of the program. So really that kind of gives you a bit of an insight. The other thing that we do a lot of is integrated conditioning. So by that is the S&C program and the training program are the same. It's just training.
Right.
And the conditioning side, we'll do a lot of skill-based drills and then into a conditioning drill, then back into a skill-based drill. And what we're trying to develop is this concept that one of my mentors, Kelvin Giles, refers to as, he calls it tough, suff and duff. We want to be developing technique under fatigue, skills under fatigue, and decision-making under fatigue. And we've got to push them to their physiological limits to be able to get into those type of zones where the skills are being massively tested under fatigue, more than they're going to experience in the cage. So when we get into our specific prep, we'll get into a lot more of this kind of tough, suff and duff. I call it tough conditioning, tough technique under fatigue conditioning, where we can really challenge them in that physiological and psychological side of things,
Oh, I really like that. So when they come in for a typical training session, I would assume that it's associated with one of those technical practices. It's either before or after, I would assume. Yeah,
and a lot of the time they might come in and they'll do their wrestling or their sort of sparring session 10 till 12 in the morning, and then they'll come in to me at, say, 1 o'clock. They'll have a bit of recovery time. 1 or 2 o'clock they'll come in to me and we'll do just a good quality strength session. But then as the closer it comes to competition time, fight time, we'll try and integrate those.
Right.
And so they don't have as much stress on the body. They can do less, but get the same result. You know what I mean?
So I would imagine, the psychology of a combat athlete. It's been a hard process to kind of get them to slow down and understand that less is more, and to really get into not doing all the crazy, YouTube exercises. It's really getting into the meat and potatoes of strength training. How do you sell that to those athletes?
Well, it's you're right, because ultimately you think about the psychology here, right? 8 weeks time you're going to get into a cage with another human being, and only one of you is going to get your hand raised at the end. And so it's very easy to slip into that concept of, I need to do more than them.
Right.
I need to do, if I do more rounds, if I train more intensively, I train harder, I do more sessions, that means I'm going to win the fight because I'm already up. So I can totally accept that psychological approach, but it's actually not the correct approach when it comes to optimizing your training adaptations. And selling it is tough. It really is tough.
Right.
And for me, the best results have come by working with individuals where you've kind of got a quick win through implementing some strength, and then they start wrestling and training with their colleagues, their teammates, and everybody just realizes, like, wow, this guy's just throwing us around here. Mm-hmm. And then they start talking and they kind of communicate, and it's very much about, well, what have you been doing? Well, I've just been doing squats and chins with Brendan, and it does make a difference.
That's right.
So trying to get that quick win with one or two people that really will benefit from the strength training. Like when I first worked with Danny Mitchell, he was weak and he was skinny, but he was very skillful and he was very fit. But he was losing fights because he didn't have that robustness. And so we just did some robustness training, basic strength work, basic work capacity. And, lo and behold, he's throwing people around the mat for fun. Right. And so word spreads. But on top of that, it's just about constant education. And I think, for me now, I'm almost like planning education into my annual plans these days with all sports. What are you going to try and deliver from an education perspective? What is the outcome? Are we trying to teach people to warm up effectively for this month? Are we trying to teach people about the value of less is more for 4 weeks? And just really hammering those educational milestones all the time. It's massive. It's huge, mate. And I'm sure you're the same. I'm sure you find.
Well, you have to be, and anymore. I've talked about it on the show a number of times. But our customers are becoming more informed consumers, aren't they? They're getting lots of information, and they're being able to read and research on their own, and they got questions. And so if something doesn't really jive with them, you have to explain it. So we start every one of our training sessions off with a whiteboard session where this is what we're trying to accomplish today and why, and this is how it relates to your sport. And I found that to be very effective.
Absolutely, yeah.
With a sport like that, where you're putting in 2 technical sessions, a training session, and recovery is so important. What have you found? What methods and what how have you approached the athletes to get them to understand the importance of recovery with your fighters?
Yeah, I mean, it's recovery is one of these areas that there are so many different options, and people try and overcomplicate it. And for me, I think it's super simple. You got to get sleep, and you got to prioritize your sleep time from an adaptations perspective. You've got to get fueled. You've got to recover well, and then we just work on active recovery, just general kind of taking them out of the environment a little bit.
Right.
So we'll go for lunch together, and we'll really make an event out of that, where the guys are getting time to be together a little bit outside of that environment, but they're actually getting fueled properly. We'll chip away with the things like your foam rolling and your stretching and stuff like that. But really, it doesn't matter how much you foam roll if you train 4 times a day and you're only getting 4 hours sleep. So it's taking care of the things that really, really matter before prioritizing all the other stuff as well. So for me, it's just about periodization is the best form of recovery. I think if you can get your program right. It doesn't matter what else is going on around it. That's the best way you can get fresh, recovered athletes, right. And then putting sleep on top of that and the fuel side. I think they're the 3 things that I really work on. And mate, just super simple. It's I'm a pretty simple person myself, and those things work for me. And they seem to do the job, and everything else is the icing on the cake.
No, we definitely have a tendency to overcomplicate things, don't we? When you first came into these team situations, you first came back home and you went into the university, and when you first took over this MMA team, there's a feeling out process there. There's opportunity to make lots of mistakes, and we were talking off camera a little bit about some of your interns going off and getting an opportunity with different programs. You have a 5-step model that you've kind of presented on for adding value in the sporting environment. Can you go in and share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, this kind of model came around really from me just having time to formulate what mistakes I've made over the last kind of 6 to 8 years and longer.
Right.
And it was fueled by a couple of instances with a couple of interns, again, over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, where we put them into an environment that they were completely alien to, really. And they had their own approach, they come from their own backgrounds, and really what they did was make a mistake too early, and it cost them the buy-in from the coaches and the athletes. And as you know, and we all know the SC coaches, the head coach and technical coach, they're the people that you need to have on your team.
Yep.
You know, we're a cog in the wheel, and as much as we'd like to do exactly what we want, we can't, because we've got to follow the rules to an extent. We do have an opportunity to make a big influence and make some changes, but if we don't do it in the right way, the chances are we're going to lose our buy-in from both our athletes and our coaches. So when I put this model together, it's just as a result of thinking about what's worked and what's not worked for me, what mistakes I've made, and with a view to when you're going in as a new coach into a new program, just to take some steps to go through to make that process a little bit easier. So the first phase, or the first step, really is literally just observation. So rather than jumping in and changing stuff, just look at the program, see what they've done, see what they're used to, see what they enjoy, and instead of looking for things to change, look for things that are working well. Look for the things that they do well, because I challenge you to find that. You know, there's always something, and even in the worst program, that they do well. An example would be, you know, when I started working with some of the MMA guys, I thought that the technical, the conditioning circuits they were doing were not great, but my God, they were doing them with an intent and a purpose and a spirit that, you know, I wouldn't want to lose that. So, you know, that's a real positive, you know, and I'm sure that every sport an environment you go into, there's always positives there you can find. So that's phase one, really.
You know, there's a good book, Switch, by Chip and Dan Heath, and it's a business book, but they're talking about, you know, going in and affecting change and switching a culture, and you know, one of the things they talk about is identifying the bright spots, you know, and so you know they relate it to a doctor going into like Africa and poverty, and you know, and all these doctors have gone in and they failed, but the one that won was the one that went in and identified the bright spots and was able to show others in that community what others were doing that exist currently in the community and having success. And that's such a great observation. That's fantastic.
Yeah, for sure. And then that kind of leads you nicely into step two, which is looking for the quick wins. So you've done some observation and you look for those things that you think, actually, I can really just quickly change that and add value.
Right.
And so for me, when I started working with some of the Paralympic guys, I was working as a consultant there, and they didn't have any real structure in their program. They didn't really have a program, but just the fact that I'd given them something to work from, and shown that I was engaged in their progress, that was enough to get that quick win to make them think, actually, yeah, we like this organisation, we like Brendan, we're going to work with him. They didn't care if they were doing squats and deadlifts. They didn't care if they were doing, you know, anything. It was just like, yep, we've got a program to work from. This guy's interested.
Absolutely.
And the MMA example, really, the quick win there was a little bit of strength training to build some buy-in. When the guys got on the mats, they felt that. That's a quick win. And my colleague and friend Ian Piper, who works with British Triathlon, I don't think he'll mind me saying, he's a great coach and works with Alistair Brownlee and Johnny Brownlee, Olympic gold and bronze medalists at London. And when he first started working with triathlon, instead of kind of going in there and racing in, he just watched, and then he just started number crunching and providing some data and some monitoring to feed back to their coaches. And then the coaches, lo and behold, started thinking, wow, this guy's really useful. You know, we're going to let him loose and let him do a little bit more and let him do a little bit more. And eventually it just builds that buy-in where people start thinking, yeah, Brendan's actually quite useful to me.
Right.
Rather than racing in and going crazy, you know?
Absolutely.
And then the third step is an interesting phrase that I borrowed from a coach, a performance coach, works in business in the UK, called Damien Hughes. His tagline, he calls himself the liquid thinker, because you've got to be able to move like liquid when you're working in organisations. And he has this phrase he calls cultural architects. And what he says is that in any organisation, in any group, in any team, there are people that have the ability to positively and negatively shape those environments. And what we need to do is look for those individuals and nurture them and get them on our side. Because as a coach, I've been in a situation where I've made mistakes, and the powerful people in the group, I've not brought them under my wing. And essentially, it's been a much more challenging role for me.
Sure.
Then when I've gone in and I've educated these cultural architects, and I've really made an effort to get them to buy into their S&C program. Because one thing's for sure, if you get those cultural architects singing your praises and loving your program, everybody else is going to love your program.
Agreed.
And they're going to take it. And it's well worth identifying and nurturing those cultural architects to get them to buy in. And it might be players, and it might be athletes, but it also might be coaches. And it might not be the technical coach, it might be a different coach, it might be the physio,
right?
Or the physical therapist. Those guys have power.
Right.
So we've got to find and identify those architects and then nurture them and put them, get them singing our praises, basically.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then the fourth step is, as we've all heard before, is balancing the need to do with the nice to do. So when you're in this environment, that they're going to have things that they enjoy doing, they're going to have things that they're used to, they're going to have a culture already set there, but they're also going to have things that you think, but we need to do that as well. And I think it's really important to get that balance right, to not write the program that you think they should be doing, but write the program that you think you're going to get the best engagement from. And that's why I always say there's no such thing as a perfect program. There's only the most appropriate program for the time and place that you're in. Because you cannot write this perfect program for MMA or American football or whatever. You've got to suit that program to the individuals, the group, the environment, the culture that you're in. And it's just a really important consideration to balance that need to do with the nice to do. And then moving on to the fifth step, the final one is introducing the performance milestones and setting the bar high. And what I mean by that is when there's data out there to look and say, well, a world-class sprinter needs to do this, but reality is you've got to introduce your own data into your own environment and say this is what we expect from our guys or girls in this program, and this is what we're working towards. I do it for everything. I do it for strength, I do it for power, I do it for endurance and energy system stuff. I do it athlete specific, but also it's then when you've gone through a cycle and they might have had a competition or they've gone through a season, is to then review it and say, well, actually, we can push that a little bit.
Right.
We can demand a little bit more from you this year. On the power side, we're going to really work on that. And I think you need to be moving the bar at this pace, this phase, or I think you can squat this much at this phase, and constantly setting the bar high so that your standards keep improving all the time and never stop. And that's a really good kind of cultural thing that you can introduce. Because what I found when doing that is that when the guys are going through a program and they know that at the end of that program they want to be squatting this or running this fast, it gives you that buy-in into your physical program that almost translates to the technical then. Because then they see themselves performing well on the field or on the court or in the cage, and then it ties in really well with your program. So, my MMA guys, for example, they know that before they go into the cage to compete, a couple of weeks before, they're going to do their 3 5-minute rounds of 20-10 burpees, so 20 seconds on, 10 seconds off, and they know that over 5 minutes, they need to be getting 12 burpees or 120 burpees in total over 10 rounds.
Right.
And they know they need to be getting this many shuttles and sprawls before they go into the cage. So psychologically, you're linking your physical conditioning to your technical execution and performance. And ultimately, that's what it's about. That's what this job's about. It's about improving.
Well, they're
not getting better in the gym.
They're competitive too. When as soon as you put a challenge out there, which is essentially what a goal is, they're gonna fight tooth and nail to try to accomplish that. And it's such an important. I agree 100% with that. What are some of the things that you've done? You talk about the culture architect. When you come into a situation, what are some of the things you've done to kind of get those wins, or kind of to change those negatives into positives?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? I guess, and I mean, I remember driving to the training ground, butterflies in my stomach, day after day after day, thinking I'm going to have to confront this guy. He doesn't like what we're doing, blah blah blah. And it can be a really, really demanding, tough time for us as coaches. But it's different for different people. And like I've had it where I've done things in public where I've embraced them and praised them in public, or I've taken them outside and kind of, for want of a better phrase, we call it bollocked them or punished them in private. And that was a lesson I learned, always to praise in public and bollock in private, if you like. But really then, always giving them that dressing down, but then educating them as well and saying, look, I need you to think about this because actually this is going to make you a better player. Right. And I think recently I read a book, you probably heard of it, Ron. It's called Start With Why.
Yeah.
Really cool book. And it explains a lot of why we don't necessarily get the results we want. So like an example might be, we go into the gym and we say, right guys, we're doing deadlifts today. Set your bars up, let's go. And what we've done, and think about keeping your chest out. And what we've done there is we've explained what they're doing, and we've given them how to do it, but we've not said why you need to do that. We've not missed that centre of the circle. And I think a little bit more time spent on why you're doing something, why I need you to engage in my program, because you're an influential person. The guys look up to you and pray, etc., etc. I've used everything and anything to try and get that buy-in, and a lot of the time it doesn't work, and it very, very rarely works instantly. But just taking the time to spend on the why, I think, mate, is a big thing for me.
Yeah, with those athletes, sometimes it really gets down to. One of the most successful things that I've done is that goal setting session. When you sat down with them and you set those high standards, but you've also turned around and you really find out what motivates them as an athlete. Is it their family? Is it going to the next level? Is it team? And when you find that and you can use that in those heated sessions, it typically leads to success if you just hit that one little trigger.
Totally. And it's just so important to spend the time to do that, or take the time to do that. And I think that's what a lot of young coaches forget, and myself included, having made a lot of mistakes there. I think it's more important. We're training people at the end of the day. We're developing people. We're not developing robots. And it's really important to develop those and get into those deeper things and build those relationships,
So that's what it all comes about. And it's a great lead into, you just wrote a book, it's not about the sets and reps, right? And we talk about that a lot on the show where, really, like you said, there is no perfect program. There is no one way to do things. It really gets into identifying what will work and really getting into the psychology of the athlete and getting them to do what you're asking them to do. And talk a little bit about the book and what was the motivation for writing it.
Yeah, no, thanks for giving me the opportunity to speak about it. I mean, it's something that as a coach, my own development has become more about. Actually, this thing's not about sets and reps. It's about the people. It's about developing people, as we've discussed. So I think that was a big driver to get that message out. But the kind of the book's a charity project, so all the profits are going to charity, and it's the charity's called CRY, which is Cardiac Risk in the Young. And a couple of years ago, we had one of our athletes tragically passed away in his sleep for that reason, and it really hit the group very, very hard. And what it's still like on my mind, and it has been a tough time when you've got a good relationship with people, and it really hit home just how close you get to your athletes and your clients when you spend this much time with them. And one of the things that I did with the book and with this group, a group of high performance cricketers, is we did this thing where we made up this challenge. And when I talk about this, I always say, well, we did this thing called the 10,000 kilogram challenge, and what you had to do was squat 10,000 kilograms, which is something like 10 sets of 10 at 100k, 10,000 kilograms. But 200 chins, 200 lunges, loads and loads of stuff. And we kind of say, like, how do you get through this in 45 minutes? And the answer is you work as a team. You do it together. You can't do that on your own. It's too much work. And so the guys, what we did with these cricketers was we put them into 4 or 5 teams, and they raced against each other to complete this challenge. And what they had to do was they had to plan the work together. They had to write it down. I wasn't giving them any answers here. They had to do it on their own in teams and then present back and say, well, he's really good at squats, so he's going to take up most of those squats. She's really good at this. He's really good at that. And what it did was it enabled the guys to talk and communicate. And that was the point of the exercise, because we'd been hit by a tragedy. And so I ripped up the strength and conditioning program that we had in place, which was, your classic sets and reps for that week. I ripped it up and we just threw this challenge at them and made them communicate and laugh and have fun and work hard. Yeah. And that was really the motivation for the book, because, the question is, why would you do some crazy challenge like that in the middle of a strength and conditioning program? Most people would probably say it's nonsense. You're not getting anything out of that. But we did get something out of that. We got communication and teamwork and engagement. And that really, for me, is what it's all about. It's, we are not just developing robots. We're building teams, people, and decision makers, and people who can think for themselves. And so the book's really a collection of, it's 87 lessons from the trenches, as I call it. And it's really just a collection of thoughts and posts and things like that. It's very, very easy to read, where we cover a lot of things like how to build relationships, the 5-step model, perfect versus appropriate programs, corrective exercise versus learning to manage yourself. So I think there's a lot of things in there. We focus too much on, actually, we need to make this movement perfect, but the reality is there is no perfect. And I spent time working with a golf coach, a real great performance coach, and he made a quote. He said something to me that resonated. He said, "You know what?" He said, "This athlete, this professional golfer, has exactly the same faults that she had 10 years ago. She's just learned how to manage those faults better than she did 10 years ago." And it made me think, it's like, why are we spending so much time trying to get 2 extra degrees of this or half a degree of that, why don't we just teach people and educate them of how to manage themselves? And there's a trade-off there that's really important, that we need to start thinking about education and teaching self-management. So yeah, it's I agree. It's a loaded collection and stuff like that on how to basically develop athletes and build a program, but with a focus on relationship building and people management. Yeah. So
that's what it's all about. And
yeah.
Again, I talk about it in almost every episode that these athletes, they got to know you care, and we always tell them that you spell love TIME. What you love, you'll spend time on, and we have 2 hours with them, and they have 22 hours to mess up everything we just did. And if you're not involved with those other 22 hours somehow, some way, be it recovery like we talked about, be it involvement in their sport like we talked about, or be it really getting to find out what makes them tick, then our job becomes very, very difficult. And as you mentioned, and as I totally agree with, it's not rocket science. It's put weight on the bar and lift the bar, sometimes we overcomplicate that, but what we don't spend enough time doing is periodizing how we're going to get them to reach those milestones from the psychology of the athlete. And I didn't know that book was for charity. I was going to recommend it wholeheartedly anyways, but now I'm going to demand it. People go out and get that book. Because, I've had athletes.
it's not expensive. In fact, it's free for a couple more days, but it's always going to be cheap. But all the proceeds are going to go to charity. So yeah, by all means, that'd be great.
We'll make sure we link that up. I've had an athlete, pass away from a cardiac as well, and it's the worst thing you could possibly go through as a strength and conditioning coach, or as any coach. Yeah. And it's definitely something that we want to bring to the forefront and continue to support. But man, I know you're busy, man. I know, I'm not even sure what time it is over there right now, but what we always end the show with some resources. So give us a quote that you live by or you have plastered up in your weight room somewhere.
Yeah. Well, the one thing there's two words that I really like and I live by for myself, but I also try to get my athletes and everybody really to take this on board. And those two words are really simple. It's just pick yourself. And what I mean by that is that you've got to accept that nobody's going to come forward and say, yep, you're the one, let's go. You've got to make that happen yourself. And I like the idea of, when you're in the school yard, you're doing the team captains thing and somebody's picking one and then the other and then the other. And before it gets to you, before you step forward and you say, I pick me. And I think that's really cool to live by as a quote and put yourself forward and just get things done and make things happen. So pick yourself is my quote of the day, Ron.
I like that. That's the way I am. What about, we're going to link up your book, obviously, and your website and things like that, but give us a book, an app, and a website recommendation for young coaches. And it doesn't have to be strength and conditioning. It could be, business or management or anything.
Yeah, all right. Well, a great book that I have read in the last 6 months is a book called Rework.
Yep.
And it really just redefines what it means to turn up and do a 9-to-5 job. It actually offers a total different scenario. And totally actually gave me a lot of different new perspectives on how to think about work and productivity and working with other people as well. And it's not an S&C book at all. It's written by some guys who wrote a load of computer programs and they did it a lot of remote working. So they had to get used to working in different ways. But it's a great book. And a very easy read as well. Like you get through it in a day or a couple of days if you get busy with it.
Sure.
So that's a cool book. An app that I can't live without is Evernote.
Yep.
You've probably got it, and I'm sure other people have got it over there. But man, I email myself notes all the time. Any ideas that I have, I send them to Evernote, and I've probably got about 3 books inside of Evernote at the moment, just waiting to come out. But any cool quotes, anything like that, I just type them up on my email and email to Evernote, and it's saved forever in there. So that's a big part of my productivity. And the website, I think, nuggets of information that really help to see the world in a clear and simple way. You cannot look further than Seth Godin's blog for me.
Yep.
The guy sends some stuff into my inbox on a daily basis, and I genuinely read it, and I think, this guy can see what I'm doing in my life. Sometimes I read him and I'm just like, what? This guy is looking into my head now and giving me advice. Yeah. And it's a great blog that's so consistently written that you can't, you will get some good stuff from that. And, I like to, when I recommend Seth Godin, I always say, this guy knows nothing about coaching, but he knows everything about coaching.
No, I agree
because it's so applicable from a communication and interaction perspective. So definitely encourage people to check that out.
Well, and you probably heard me say it on the show, but, I presented at the NSVA conference on this topic, but, to be a successful strength coach, I think you've got to be 3 things. You have to be a technician, you have to be able to teach the lifts and coach the lifts and all that. And that's where most people start and stop, unfortunately. But you also have to be a great manager. You have to manage time and resources and people. And then lastly, you have to be an entrepreneur. You have to be forward thinking and you have to be constantly challenging yourself and cutting edge. And, and you gave 3 things that wouldn't be your typical strength and conditioning responses. But, I've read Rework. books like 4 Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss and things like that, people turn off to that because we're like, yeah, man, we work 17 hours a day. What do we, 4 hours, that's not even, but the amount of things that I've learned from outsourcing and social media and things like that from those have made me a better strength coach. Evernote makes me a better strength coach, and Seth Godin, Tribes and Meatball Sunday and all these books that he's written are fantastic and make you a better strength coach. And so I know you would agree with me, but challenging, we had a little bit of technical difficulty, so I'm not sure where we fell off, but, I was finishing with, Brendan gave three resources that were outside of the strength conditioning box, but are so important to becoming a better strength coach. And I couldn't agree more with Evernote and Seth Godin. His books are fantastic. And I've read pretty much every single one of them, but, they're definitely applicable to strength conditioning if you make it that way. And I think, like I said, those to be a successful strength coach, you have to be those three things. And Brendan, you do that on a daily basis, man. Like I said at the very beginning, I'm so impressed with what you've done in your career and how you've done it, and the motivation behind it's probably the most thing, because as coaches sometimes they when you start putting yourself out there like you have, like I have. There's always those guys that are like, well, why, it's just all about money and things like that. And it absolutely isn't with you or with me.
No. If it was about money, you would be in a different industry, wouldn't we? We'd be doing totally different.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Totally, mate.
But, man, I appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks so much, man. No,
it's a pleasure, mate. And I really appreciate you guys listening to this. And, my motto is just keep getting better at getting better. That's what it's all about.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, we'll make sure we link up your website and you have a couple websites. You got a couple products out there, things like that. We'll make sure we put that out there. And I can't recommend people get those things as much more. So make sure you do that. Stop by ronmckeefery.com for the show notes.
Thanks again, Ron. Speak to you soon, mate.
That's it for this episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk. Thanks to this week's guest, as well as our sponsors, EliteForm.com and IgnitionAPG.com, for bringing this episode to you for free. Make sure to check out RonMcKeefery.com, where you can join our mailing list, find the show notes, including all the links and resources mentioned, and information about Coach McKeefery's other products. While you are there, please join Coach McKeefery in the comments section thanking our guest for sharing. If you haven't subscribed to Iron Game Chalk Talk on YouTube or iTunes yet, make sure to do so. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome. Coach McKeefery can be found on Twitter at @RMcKeefery, on Facebook and YouTube at /Ron.McKeefery. That's it for this week. Be sure to check back next week for another great episode of Iron Game Chalk Talk.